the body. Now, your body's made up of 30 trillion cells. Of these cells, there's around about 200 individual cell types. If you were to group these cells in accordance with their function, what you get are the 4 tissues of the body. Now, these 4 tissues include nervous tissue, muscle tissue, epithelial tissue, and connective tissue. So let's have a quick run through of each one. If we start off with nervous tissue, what we're talking about here is that of the nervous system. So this is made up of neurons and glia. Now, glia is Greek for glue. They're the supporting cells of the neuron. There's many different types: oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells, ependymal cells, astrocytes. These are all different types of supporting cells of the nervous system. And then the functional cell of the nervous system, the cell that allows for communication to occur, this is the primary function, as you can see, of nervous tissue. They're called neurons. Now, these individual cells coming together, forming the functional tissue, forms the brain, forms the brain stem, forms the spinal cord, and also forms the nerves that come out and away, and also the nerves that come back in. Of the brain, there's 12 pairs of nerves that go out and away and back in. They're called the cranial nerves. I've done a video on that. And we've got the spine with the spinal nerves as well. So this is nervous tissue. When we look at muscle tissue, muscles allow for movement. They allow for us to be able to do something. There's 3 different types. We've got cardiac muscle. This is the muscle that makes up the heart. We've got skeletal muscle. This is muscle attached to bones, allows us to be able to move our skeleton. And we've got muscle that lines our hollow organs, such as the organs of our GI tract, even the organs of our urinary tract, such as our urethra and ureter, for example, or the reproductive system. These muscles, smooth muscle, like I said, they're called, lining the hollow organs, they allow for contraction and relaxation to move products through. If we're talking about that of our gastrointestinal tract, it allows us to move foodstuffs or fecal material through in a process called peristalsis. So again, muscle tissue there for movement, 3 different types: cardiac, skeletal, and smooth. Move on to epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue forms boundaries between environments. So, for example, you've got epithelial tissue that lines your skin, separating the outside world from the inside world of your body. You've got epithelial tissue of your kidneys. You've got epithelial tissue of your lungs. You've got epithelial tissue anywhere in which there's 2 separate environments. Epithelia sets that boundary. Now,
Sub-zero. Are those glasses of water?
And allow things to go back and forth. Sometimes you set a boundary where you don't want anything to go back and forth. This is still the function of epithelial tissue and the individual epithelial cells.
Dude, it rained all night. That is like...
in different shapes.
It was like thunderstorming, I'm pretty sure, all night, so...
Simple squamous epithelia. So simple means one layer. So if you have simple epithelia, it's just a single layer of cells. If it's squamous, it means they're squished like pancakes. You can have stratified squamous. That means they're stacked on top of each other. You can have simple cuboidal, shaped like cubes, or you can have simple columnar, for example. You can also have pseudo-stratified, where it looks like there's multiple layers, but there's only just one layer.
What?
Or you can even have transitional epithelia, where it starts as one type and turns into another type. For example, if it's flat in one layer, it wants things to go through, such as diffusion to occur. You can find this in your lungs, where we want gases to exchange. Stratified squamous, where there's multiple layers, well, we don't want anything to go through, so this is going to be a protective layer, such as our skin. When you've got a bigger cell in the epithelium, that means there's going to be contents of the cell organelles, subcellular structures for things to happen, that means these cells are going to produce something. So that means those are the cuboidal and columnar are going to produce things, and they're often the mucus secreting cells, or even the cells that make up glands of the body. All right, last one's connective tissue. You can see connective tissue supports, protects, and binds. And there's heaps of different types of connective tissue. Bone is connective tissue, tendons are connective tissue, fat cells are connective tissue, and even blood is connective tissue. So that means connective tissue can be solid, semi-solid, or even liquid. So then what makes connective tissue connective tissue? Well, connective tissue is made up of gels and fibers, okay? So the gels are going to be, think of jelly, for example. It's what you embed everything in. It's like the concrete, for example. And fibers are what you put inside of that gel to change the consistency. You could put elastic things in that gel to make it bendy and stretchy. You could put very solid things in that gel to make it very strong and immovable. This is how Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. In this video we're going to focus on one of the 4 tissue types of the body that we call epithelia. Now remember, epithelia, its function is there to form boundaries between environments. Now sometimes we want to be able to pass through these boundaries. Sometimes we only want certain things to pass through these boundaries. Sometimes we don't want anything to pass through at all. Now other times these boundaries may facilitate movement across the surface of the boundary. So epithelia, while it does form a boundary between environments, it can do this a number of different ways. So let's have a look at these different ways. First thing is, when we look at epithelial tissue, form equals function. That means you can look at the type of epithelia and it tells you what it does. If it is a single layer or if it is of a particular epithelial cell type, in combination tells you what it can do. Okay, for example, if we look at the most basic type of epithelia, which we call simple squamous. Simple means one layer, squamous means squished. So here you can see we have simple squamous epithelia located in our lungs. Now, I want you to think about it. Form equals function. It's squished and only one layer because it wants things to move through. Now, if it's in the lungs, what do you think is going to move through? Gases. So, for example, simple squamous epithelia located in the lungs is there for gas exchange. Now, we can also look at stratified squamous. This is the squished cells of the epithelia packed on top of each other. Now, if it's like that, it's there because, one, it's squished, which means it doesn't have many intracellular components. No organelles, no mitochondria, rough or smooth endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, anything like that, which is telling you that these cells may likely be dead. So, they're there for protection. It doesn't matter if they're going to be abrased or swiped off due to damage, okay? The term we call is sloughing, if those cells disappear over time. So it's there for protection, okay? So multiple squished cells, which we call stratified, many layers, squamous. We've got stratified squamous cells in the oral cavity. And we've got stratified squamous cells of our skin. The difference here is that one of them has another layer of stratified epithelia that's keratinized. That means it has a protein inside that's waterproof. Now that's going to be that of our skin because we want our skin to be waterproof. So both the epithelia within our oral cavity and our skin are stratified squamous. It's just one of them is keratinized. All right, let's move on and look at the tricky one that's sitting in our trachea. So our trachea is our windpipe. We're bringing air in down our windpipe, and we want to bring air back out. So mainly oxygen in, mainly carbon dioxide out. But we know that the air that we're breathing in isn't pure oxygen or even just pure gas. It's filled with particulates and pollutants and things that we don't want to get down into our lungs. So what we have is columnar epithelia within our trachea. Now this columnar epithelia looks like it's many layers, but in actual fact it's one. So we call this pseudo-stratified. Pseudo means fake. It looks like it's one thing, but it's not. Stratified. Pseudo-stratified epithelia. In actual fact, it's pseudo-stratified columnar epithelia because they're shaped like columns. They're longer than they are wider. And you can also see that they have these little hairs on the top that we call cilia. So the epithelia we find in our trachea we call pseudo-stratified columnar ciliated epithelia. Now, why do we have this type of epithelia in our trachea? Well, like I was saying before, what you'll find is we breathe in a whole bunch of pollutants or particulates and crap that we just don't want to bring into our lungs. So, when you've got columnar epithelia, that often tells you that there's a lot of intracellular components like rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus. So they're doing things, they're making stuff. And so in the columnar epithelia, you should think that they're starting to make something to be secreted. And often it's going to be mucus. So we've got mucus. They capture and move things across. So we've got pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelia in our trachea because the mucus captures pollutants, the cilia takes it, and what it does is it throws it up the trachea so we can cough it out. If you're a smoker, it actually kills off the cilia, which means the mucus may capture the pollutants and particulates, but it falls down into their lungs, and then what does a smoker do every single morning? They will cough and cough and cough to bring up that gunk. All right. Let's move on down to the small intestines. Now, the small intestines have columnar epithelia as well. So straight away you should think if it's columnar, it's going to be producing stuff. And it does. It produces mucus and many other different types of enzymes, for example. And it also has these little things on top that look like the cilia, but in actual fact, they look like fingertip-like projections. This is called villi and microvilli, okay? Fingertip-like projections. And what they do is they increase the surface area of the epithelia so that more things can be absorbed. So the columnar epithelia with microvilli and villi on top is there to produce mucus and secrete it and other enzymes as well, and also to absorb the nutrients in the small intestines. All right, let's look at two others. That of the kidneys. The kidneys, specifically the nephron. Now, the nephron is going to be these convoluted tubules within the kidneys that can selectively absorb or reabsorb, okay, absorb or reabsorb components from what's been filtered in the kidneys and can throw it back into the blood. It can decide, do I want to pee this out or do I want to throw it back into the blood? And so what we have are cuboidal or simple cuboidal epithelia. So it's one layer, so we want things to be able to go through. It's cuboidal because it wants things to come in. It may process it a little bit and throw it back out, or vice versa. So the nephron of the kidneys contains simple cuboidal epithelia. Now the last one I want to talk about is that of the bladder. Now the bladder needs to distend and snap back into place. Distend, snap back into place. So it has what we call transitional epithelia. That means it may be cuboidal, it may be columnar, it may be squamous. So that when it stretches, the tissue... Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. In this video we're going to look at cartilage and some of the cartilage types. Now first remember, cartilage is a type of connective tissue. And connective tissues, what they do is they hold, they bind and they support structures. And we know there's many different types of connective tissues. You've got bone, you've got cartilage, you've got tendons, you've got ligaments, you even have blood, for example. Now what makes a connective tissue a connective tissue is they are made up of three important things. They're made up of cells, gels, and fibers. Now, when we're talking about cartilage, the cells, gels, and fibers that compose cartilage include, for cells, the chondroblasts. Chondro as a prefix means cartilage. Blast means to build. It's an immature cell type. It helps build the cartilage. Once these cells that are building the cartilage mature, they turn into chondrocytes, with the suffix "cyte" just meaning cell. Now, gels. The gels make up the predominant extracellular matrix of that particular tissue type. And so, in this case, it's a ground substance made up predominantly of proteoglycans, that's proteins and sugars. And these proteoglycans have all these little things sticking off. Like you can see here, you've got the proteoglycan here, and it's got all these things sticking off. These things sticking off are called GAGs, glycosaminoglycans. And the most predominant type of glycosaminoglycan, which is just a carbohydrate, right, is chondroitin sulfate. So you can see these little blue feather-looking things sticking off. That's chondroitin sulfate. And what chondroitin sulfate does is it's negatively charged and it loves binding to water. And so that means that the gels within cartilage have a very high capacity for holding water to it. In actual fact, 80% of all cartilage is water. And when it pulls cartilage towards it, it starts to fill itself up until it becomes quite this turgid, solid mass. And because you're going to find cartilage lining pretty much every bone's surface when it's at a joint, that means that when you put pressure on that cartilage, it evenly distributes that force throughout that fluid, and therefore the force that's being transmitted into the bone is evenly distributed. It's like when you jump onto a waterbed, it evenly distributes that force. So that's the gels. The fibers that we look at for cartilage is predominantly collagen, so the majority is collagen, but some contains high amounts of elastic tissue. Now what you're going to find is that cartilage is the precursor tissue for bone for the fetal organism. So for fetuses, instead of having a skeleton, they actually have cartilage. In actual fact, newborn babies are predominantly cartilage instead of bone, and then it turns into bone through a process which I'll discuss in another video. Now, we've outlined all the different parts of cells, gels, and fibers when it comes to connective tissue, but when it comes to cartilage, but there's three types of cartilage. You've got elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, and hyaline cartilage. All right, let's first start with elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage simply has high amounts of elastic tissue. And there's only two places you're going to find this elastic cartilage: the external ear and also the epiglottis. The epiglottis is that little cartilaginous flap that sits over the top of the trachea so that we don't bring water and food into our airways. The second type is fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is there to resist compressive forces. So if you think what part of our body needs to resist compressive forces, that's going to be our vertebral column. So the discs in between our vertebrae are going to be made up of fibrocartilage. But there's other places such as our pubic symphysis. So at our pubis, where the two bones come together, you're going to have fibrocartilage, and you can also find fibrocartilage at the knee joint, again, to resist compressive forces. The last one I want to talk about is hyaline cartilage. Now, this is the most common or most abundant type of cartilage in the body, and it lines articulating surfaces of long bones. So, for example, you're going to have hyaline cartilage here, you're going to have hyaline cartilage here, hyaline cartilage here and here. Again, lining the articulating, so when one bone talks to another bone at a joint, that's an articulation. So hyaline cartilage is also called articulating cartilage or articular cartilage. You'll also find hyaline cartilage at our ribs, so at the cartilage portion of our ribs, and also at our nose, for example. So think about it. Cartilage is connective tissue. You're going to find it anywhere where we need some sort of durability, but also slight pliability, needs to be able to move a little bit. And it's going to resist compressive forces. Also, it's going to resist other types of forces, such as that of friction at articulating surfaces. So that's cartilage. Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. In this video, we're going to take a look at bony tissue. So remember, bone is just like cartilage, just like blood, just like tendons and ligaments. It is another connective tissue. And that means it's going to contain cells, gels, and fibers. Remember, cells, gels, and fibers make up connective tissue. Now, the skeleton, which is going to be made up of bones, is there to provide structural support for the body, protection, but also is a housing unit for very important minerals of the body. And we're going to talk about those in a sec. But first, let's have a look at the cells, gels, and fibers that make up bony tissue. So the cells of bony tissue include osteoprogenitor cells. Osteo as a prefix means bone. Progenitor means it's going to create something. So these are basically the stem cells of our bony tissue. Then we've got osteoblasts. The blast tells you it's building. So these are the bone building cells. They release a substance called osteoid, which helps build bone. Osteoclast, think of the clast as though it means crushing. This breaks bone down. And the last one is the osteocyte. That's the mature osteoblast, the mature bone cell. Now, our bone is constantly being remodeled. That means it's constantly building itself up, breaking itself down, building up, breaking down. The more you use bone, the more this remodeling process occurs. Also, the more you use bone, the more the building process occurs to make the bone stronger. Now, osteoporosis is a disease in which this remodeling process of building and breaking is imbalanced, and you have more breaking and less building, and you get holes in your bones. I'll talk more about that later on. Okay, so these are the cell types within bony tissue. What about the gels? So the gels include the glycoproteins and also the glycosaminoglycans. Remember, they're the carbohydrates. Now, if we look at bony tissue, 15% of its entire mass is water, okay? 15% of bony tissue. The rest is what we call dry weight. Now, of that 75 odd 80% of that dry weight, what you're going to find is that 30% of it is going to be the gel portion. So the extracellular matrix, the ground substance, what we call the glycoproteins and the glycosaminoglycans. That's 30% of the dry weight. The remaining 70% of the dry weight is actually something that bony tissue has that other connective tissues don't have. These are the mineral depositions. So 70% of the dry weight of bone is made up of something called hydroxyapatite, and it's predominantly calcium and phosphate, okay? So bone has all these minerals dissolved into it, and this is what makes bone hard, and these minerals are calcium and phosphate. So that's very, very important. You'll also find that we can break up the gels and fibers together. We call the organic components of bone, and the minerals are the inorganic components of bone. So this is, again, important as well. I'll talk about that shortly. Now, when it comes to fibers, the major fiber type within bone is collagen. So together, the organic components of bone make up 30% of its dry weight, and the inorganic components of bone make up 70% of its dry weight. All right, now what we're going to do is look at the anatomy of a long bone. So we've got a long bone here, and you can see that this long bone I've sort of cut, and we're looking inside of that long bone, and you can see that it's made up of two bone types. This is what we call cortical bone and spongy bone, okay? This cortical bone is a very dense bone. The spongy bone, by name, is a spongy in appearance looking bone. It's not spongy to feel, still very hard, but not as hard as the cortical bone, okay? So what you're going to find is you're going to have the cortical bone sitting on the very outside of a long bone, and then you're going to have the spongy bone sitting more so in the middle of the long bone. Now, deep within the middle of a long bone. Now, in this video, we're going to go through the spinal nerves. So very quickly, I want you to remember that the peripheral nervous system, meaning the nervous system that comprises of all the nerves that come out and away from the brain and the spine, and all the nerves that come back in towards the brain and the spine, that's what we refer to as the peripheral.
This video right here may be the most important video I make about anatomy and physiology. Why? The levels of organization that I'm going to share with you right here take you through the entire A&P course, the entire A&P everything. So with the levels of organization, what it is, most simplest way I can tell you is it's the levels of the body. If you're playing a video game, there's level 1, level 2, level 3, 4, and eventually it's the end. Okay? So in anatomy and physiology, this is your beginning and end of that game. The levels of organization starts down here and goes up here. So I'm going to just break them down for you to have some pearls here for you to remember. Okay, so here we go. You're going to see throughout the course of this video series here on anatomy and physiology, we're going to start with the atom. The smallest part, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, the organism. Hey, that's us. So that's what we do. So the chemical level is the base level of the levels of organization. Okay, so chemical, or some may call it the molecular level. Okay, that's atoms. Okay, we then move up from there to the cellular level. Well, it's in the name. That's cells. Okay, from there we go to the tissue level. Now, what's a pro I can give you to remember tissues? Well, it's right above cells, right? So for tissues, think it's a bunch of cells working together for a common goal, to complete a common function. That's tissues. They come together. Cells come together. Okay? They're not separate. They come together and make tissue. Okay? Then we have organs. So now it gets pretty easy here. Okay, we know this kind of stuff. Organs, think of the heart. An organ system, think of how the body can maintain someone's blood pressure. What is that? Part of the cardiovascular system, right? Pretty cool, right? So we have blood vessels in the system. We have the heart. So the heart would be the organ. The blood vessels, the entire system at play is the cardiovascular system, okay? Now the final piece here we have is the organism. That's us, the human. There it is. This is the level of organization. I'll see you in the next video. What exactly is homeostasis? Maybe you heard the word before, but you're maybe unsure what it means. There's some key terms here we got to know about when it comes to anatomy and physiology, when it comes to homeostasis. And it's one of the core things you have to know about. So here's homeostasis. Quite simply, it is the stable internal environment in the body. Now, that's the definition of it, okay? So if you see it on a test, that's what it is, okay? Now let's talk about how this all works. So throughout the body, and you'll see the terms here. Let's just do the terms first. Homeostatic regulation, okay, is the umbrella term that involves all this down here. Receptor, control center, effector, negative feedback. We're going to talk about that.